A cold smoke rises above a market screen and a line drops like a cliff. In a neon-lit office, a trader grips a cup, stares at a number, and realizes that a vote has tipped more than a government. In a living room in the provinces, a family shrugs at a promise painted on a red bus, and then, months later, finds the bill on a grocery receipt. The mystery isn't an explosion. The mystery is a slow, almost polite fall that ends up breaking an economy without a sound. If you like stories where slogans dissolve on contact with facts, subscribe and ring the bell. Here we follow the trail of money, the trail of fear, and the trail of decisions that get paid for long after the applause. In the history of nations, there are moments when a country chooses a feeling over a mechanism. A flag in the wind, a crowd shouting, a microphone crackling, and a simple sentence that fits inside a photo. In the United Kingdom, that photo often has a very specific set: a scarlet coach, a white stripe, and a promise hammered onto the bodywork. £350 million a week for the health service. That line was later acknowledged as misleading by figures from the pro-Leave side. A promise doesn't need to be accurate to be effective. It has to be clear. It has to offer a culprit. It has to offer a refund. And in 2016, the country had a fatigue ready to ignite. The years before had left economic scars, social anger, the feeling of being stuck in an endless waiting room. In that setting, a debate about trade rules turns into a war of nerves. Picture a town on voting day, drizzle on black bricks, a queue outside a school, hurried faces, a radio talking about sovereignty, a neighbour whispering, "We're going to take back control." Inside a booth, a pencil makes a dry scratch on paper, a tiny gesture, a massive effect. In London, while ballots drop into boxes, another scene plays out. People in white shirts track polls minute by minute. Screens show flows. Quiet bets pile up. And then the night moves on. Local results arrive. And the atmosphere shifts. A market can be a faceless crowd. It never applauds. It never forgives. It reacts. It adjusts one price, then another. The immediate shock is uncertainty. A business owner doesn't invest in a new production line when they don't know what rules will apply in 2 years. A finance director postpones an order for machinery when they can't tell whether checks will trap parts at a border. The economy, in that moment, looks like an engine idling. It makes noise, it burns fuel, it doesn't really move. And while commentators argue over words, reality leaks into domestic details. A weaker pound makes imports more expensive. Products from abroad cost more. A diffuse rise spreads, in thin layers, across food, across energy, across everyday items. The public doesn't read charts at every meal. They feel it in a shopping basket. Then comes a second phase, quieter, almost invisible to the naked eye. Trade starts to rub and grind. Where a truck once passed like a shadow, forms appear. Where a small company used to ship a pallet in a few clicks, delays show up. A modern economy lives on speed, on predictability, on stable rules. When stability vanishes, the cost climbs, even when no cannon fires. And here is the trap. A country can absorb a single blow. A crisis, a crash, a storm. The danger is a chain of micro blows that wear a society down. A rise here, a delay there, a decision postponed, a hire cancelled, a factory waiting, a laboratory hesitating. A loss of confidence acts like an invisible tax. Supporters of the break often held up a simple idea. Autonomy will let us decide better, faster, without constraints. But a faster decision isn't automatically a richer decision. A treaty wrestled from a major partner doesn't necessarily deliver instant prosperity. Potential gains exist on paper. Costs exist inside supply chains. A country then discovers a cruel paradox. The big words take up all the space, and the fine print of contracts takes the rest. An economy doesn't live on intentions, it lives on incentives, and the dominant incentive after the vote becomes waiting. For years, the political debate spins like a wheel on gravel. deals pushed back, votes that fail, endless negotiations. Meanwhile, an old sentence returns, but in a different form. A reputation for stability can erode. An investor, facing a state perceived as unpredictable, demands a higher return. That extra yield is a price of risk. And then comes the moment when a hidden fragility turns visible. September 2022. A mini-budget sets off a storm in the bond market, heavy pressure hits pension fund strategies, and the Bank of England steps in to stabilise that slice of the system. The central bank confirmed action aimed at calming the pensions market after those turbulences. Rewatch the scene like a film. A grey morning, phones buzzing, documents printed in a rush, numbers flashing red on screens. A pension manager, face set hard, understands that theory is colliding with real time. A move too fast, a margin mechanism, and liquidity disappears. In that moment, the economy stops being a debate. It becomes an emergency. The public, meanwhile, sees the echo through another lens. Rates rising, monthly payments shifting, a new anxiety around credit. The national story changes. There was a vote. There were promises. And now there is a bill arriving in fragments. What's most unsettling is that the 2022 crisis gives a sharp image. But it doesn't create the illness. It reveals a body already weakened by years of strain, underinvestment, trade friction, and damaged trust. A society can tolerate discomfort for a long time. It cannot tolerate discomfort plus panic. And at that precise moment, a question takes shape in the corridors of power. A question no one wants to say out loud on camera. If the problem is no longer a negotiation, if the problem has become a permanent risk price, then what does the pride of having chosen cost every single year? The answer starts to appear not in a statement, but in a silence. The silence of investment that doesn't come back, the silence of a project that dies before the first stone is laid, the silence of a country that realizes sovereignty has a price. And the meter is running. Weeks after the storm, the country is still walking like a man who stumbled without falling, and then suddenly realizes his ankle has cracked. The panic of 2022 left a mark on something almost no one can see, yet everyone pays for: trust. In a kitchen, a couple opens a letter from the bank, exhales and understands that a distant event has touched a loan, a home, a life. Pause. In Westminster, speeches promise a return to calm. In the city, a different language circulates. An added risk premium, an implicit surcharge, a borrowing cost that refuses to sink back to where it used to be. A country can survive a bad day. It suffers when a bad day permanently changes how the world judges it. To measure that judgment, you have to look at the most ordinary place in modern trade: paperwork. From January 1st, 2021, the United Kingdom leaves the single market and the customs union. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement applies provisionally from that date and then enters into force later. And immediately an administrative reality appears: declarations, proofs of origin, procedures, possible checks, verifications. A machine that small businesses experience as a forest of boxes. Picture a scene at the border. A driver climbs down, stamps his foot against the cold, breathes in the bite of diesel. A trailer waits for a stamp. An officer flips through a file, searches for a code, taps a line. Time stretches, the cargo warms, a delivery misses a slot. One delay, on its own, seems trivial. 1,000 delays become bleeding. In studios, people talk about regulatory freedom. In warehouses, people talk about lead times. And behind those lead times hides a heavier phenomenon: investment that hesitates. When a company doubts smooth access to its biggest neighboring market, it builds less, upgrades less, takes fewer risks. Growth doesn't always collapse like a tower. It can sag like dough left too long in the cold. This is where cold numbers turn into a human story. The Office for Budget Responsibility, the independent public body that produces projections for public finances, judged that a free trade agreement type relationship with the European Union would, in the long run, mean a productivity loss of around 4% compared with staying in the EU. 4% sounds small in conversation. In an economy, it's a shadow that stretches over wages, over tax revenue, over hospitals, over schools. That loss doesn't show up when a ballot is folded. It shows up when an industrial town doesn't land a battery plant. It shows up when a laboratory hesitates to hire a team. It shows up when an entrepreneur gives up exporting because one extra form wipes out an already thin margin. A nation can endure a theoretical injustice. It breaks on a daily one. And then there's another shock, almost ironic, because it contradicts a central promise. Many voters cast their ballots expecting lower immigration. Yet official figures showed record net migration in 2022, first estimated around 606,000, then revised later to 745,000. Origins shift, stressed sectors hunt for staff, work visas multiply, and society discovers that taking back control does not automatically mean getting the desired outcome. In a hospital, a corridor smells of disinfectant. A nurse moves fast, badge at her chest, eyes ringed with fatigue. In a care home, a manager rereads a rota, scratches out names, searches for a solution for tomorrow's shift. That immigration has nothing to do with a slogan. It's a bandage over shortages. Add that to trade friction, to the risk premium, to cautious investment, and you get a collective sensation: exhausting stagnation. People don't analyze productivity. They feel wages that won't move, rent that climbs, an energy bill that bites. Public services become a set that starts to crack, waiting, delays, worn-out buildings. The state feels less solid. The street feels harder. At this point, a temptation arrives to hunt for one single moment, one grand culprit, one definitive scene. Many point to the red bus because it's photogenic, because it summarizes an era. And it did carry powerful symbolic force. The famous £350 million promise was disowned after the vote by pro-Brexit political figures. But a poster doesn't govern by itself. What mattered was what it enabled: a heavy decision made in an atmosphere where emotion crushed mechanisms. And the other temptation, more dangerous, is to believe there is a simple reverse gear. But an economy once reorganized doesn't return to its previous state because of a speech. Supply chains move, offices open elsewhere, habits harden. A reputation takes years to build and far less time to crack. So how does the story end? With a political victory, a miracle deal, a collective awakening? The honest answer is darker. It often ends with adaptation, not triumph. Leaders talk about global opportunities. Companies calculate costs. Households tighten belts. The nation continues because a nation always continues, but with a new baseline. And in the middle of that new baseline, one almost private riddle remains. What was actually bought in 2016? A felt independence, a symbolic revenge, a temporary relief? While the public still argues over meaning, the economic meter doesn't debate, it adds. In a final scene, picture a quiet room early in the morning. A senior civil servant opens a file, reads a forecast note, rereads an assumption, then stops on one sentence: in the long run, a productivity loss of around 4%. He sets the paper down, looks out the window, watches the city wake up, hears a siren somewhere in the distance, and understands that the sentence isn't a number. It's a budgetary, social, political destiny. Pause. And that's where the deadlock becomes total. The country wants prosperity restored, yet it chose a path that makes every step heavier. Can the United Kingdom reduce that weight without betraying its own story? Or is it condemned to pay, year after year, an invisible tax on trust, one that never appears on any ballot but gets printed onto every loan, every investment, every postponed project?